Carnival Friday. Happy Carnival Friday. And today we do have an amazing presentation. Well, really a Q&A discussion with Julian Alcantara, who we are so happy to have to join us. Now, I will read his bio because it is quite impressive. So take it all in. And I know we would have asked you all to submit questions. If you, while he's speaking, you still have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. All right. And of course, so Julian Alcantara, ACA, he's a producer and consultant, an honors graduate in economics from Bristol University and a fluent Spanish speaker. Julian Alcantara has worked across many aspects of the film business for 25 years. He began his career with Price Waterhouse, qualifying as a chartered accountant, and as we know in film, that's important. And then recruited to a specialized strategic consulting team in PW, which is PwC, specializing in the media, where his clients included Sony and Disney. While here, he was a keynote speaker at two conferences, the Economics Conference on Shareholder Value and Euromoney Conference on Advanced Strategies for Company Valuation, and also contributed as a chapter to the published book In Search of Shareholder Value. Now, he's a veteran of both Polygram Films and Universal Pictures. Julian ran the Universal Pictures International Production and Acquisitions arm under the President of Acquisitions, managing an extensive slate of over 25 films, ranging from big budget studio projects to small Oscar-nominated foreign language films, in addition to the release of all working title films. He also managed the production and development deal with production companies such as DNA Films and award-winning directors such as Alan Parker. In addition to the mainstream Western film industry, through his work as an independent producer and advisor over more than the last 10 years, Julian has developed an in-depth knowledge of both Indian and Chinese film industries, with an extensive range of contacts through the India and China, including many of the top producers and production companies, financiers, distributors, directors, and talent. He has also traveled and worked extensively in the Middle East, both in and outside the film arena. He's a guest lecturer and mentor at the London Film School. He has worked and been a panelist of numerous film festivals, all of the top ones, you name it, the answer is yes. Of course, he's the founding partner of Random Character Pictures, along with two-time Academy Award nominated producer of Star Wars, Gary Kurtz, and is actively working on feature film and TV projects across the world, including the US, China, India, Nigeria, South Africa, Mauritius, and the Middle East. He is a founder and co-director of the London Action Festival in 2022, which has celebrated 2 successful editions. And he is also a voting member of the British Academy of Film and Television Arts. Welcome, Julian Alcantara. Thank you. And for those who just joined us, my name is Leslie Ann Wills-Caton, the Film Commissioner, Trinidad and Tobago, General Manager of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Company. And I will quickly hand over to Julian to answer all of your questions that you would have submitted. And just to recap, if you still have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. Additionally, a lot of you all have registered as the lovely Danielle Romani. If your name is showing up as Danielle Romani, it's not AI. You can just change your name so that we can identify who you are. We do have a glitch in the system, so all of the lovely Romanis, please change your name so we can see who you are. There are about 10 of you all. All right, and we hand over. Do enjoy your session as you lunch and you learn. Julian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And good afternoon, everyone. I hope I can complement your lunch rather than sort of make you choke on anything that you're going to be eating right now. But the reality of today is for me to end up making you feel that at the end of the hour, you finish your lunch more informed and more knowledgeable than before you started. There was a range of questions that were submitted in advance. A couple of them touched on areas that sort of strictly outside sales and distribution. If we have time to touch upon them, we will. But I really wanted to focus it on sales and distribution today. There is no such thing as a stupid question. If you feel there's anything that is not addressed by the end of this session, please, and again, feel free to pass it on to Leslie Ann and her team, who can forward it to me. And I want to make sure that just because you didn't get a chance to ask it or we run out of time, it doesn't mean that your question isn't going to be answered. All right? So I'm going to apologize in advance because I need to assume that whilst the level of knowledge between you may vary, we've got to ultimately assume that we've got to speak to possibly the most basic level of knowledge that someone may understand. So I've got to assume, given I don't know each of you individually, that there are certain terms and things that you may not know as I go through all of this. So we're here today to talk about sales and distribution. And I think the first thing to establish is what those two things are. Sales, by its very implication, is not strictly the sale of a film or the sale rights of a film. Anything that you create, which is a piece of intellectual property that you own, whether it's something you write or something you make visually, you end up wanting to be able to try and get it out to audiences all around the world. So very rarely will you ever literally sell it. What most people refer to when they talk to about sales is actually licensing, meaning you are going to give rights to some partner somewhere else to be able to take advantage of that content, use it, monetize it in some way over a period of time. Typically, those contracts can be as long as 10, 15 years. They could be shorter, they could be longer. But the reality is, so a sale is not quite a sale in that regard. It's licensing it for a period of time. There's going to be an element of back and forth on this because areas overlap. So please bear with me as I want to try and encompass what I talk to you about now is going to answer and touch upon a lot of questions that were asked in advance of today. So who sells a film? Appropriately enough, they are sales companies. So they are companies that exist all around the world. Some of them very small, some of them incredibly large. Some of them deal with very genre specific. They may just deal in horror. There are ones set up just for specific languages. Equally, there are ones that deal in content of all sorts all around the world. Where and how do they sell? These companies are ones that literally will attend most of the global film festivals, not so much because of the festival, but because of the market elements that are attached to it. The vast majority of people who attend festivals like Berlin and Cannes aren't there to watch movies, they're there to do business. And the reality is the reason why that is often so efficient is because everybody from around the world is in the same place at the same time. So whilst there are a lot of communication in advance between them, these sales companies will have reached out, set up meetings, set up screenings of films and content and trailers, and pitching projects to sell to their people. Now, who do they sell them to? This is what next brings us on to the distribution side of it. Salespeople sell to a distributor. And what is a distributor? A distributor is distributor are companies themselves who literally buy the rights to show a film or a TV show in a particular territory or territories all around the world. So what you tend to find sometimes, there are territories that fix things up specifically for France, for Germany, for Brazil, for Mexico. And there are times there are companies that are large enough, the largest being the major US studios, that often when they acquire distribution rights to something, they literally can do something across a whole range of countries or sometimes pick something up for the entirety of the world. One of the things you tend to find as well, and although it's slightly different, they're not a distributor as such, is as part of this conversation, we now need to include the streamers, Netflix, your Amazons of this world. Because whilst they are not traditional distributors, these are people who will be buying the rights or licensing the rights from sales agents for the territories that they operate in. So what does a distributor do? That distributor in turn has to be the one who actually goes out and speaks to the cinema chains, has to be the one that goes out and speaks to the video stores where they still say DVDs and Blu-rays. He's the one who actually goes to speak to the TV stations and say, I've got the rights to this film. Are you interested in licensing it from me? So in many ways, think of this as a ladder, whereby right at the bottom of the ladder, consider yourselves as the creators of these original pieces of content. And as you go up the ladder, there are more and different companies being involved. Sometimes there are ones that are involved across multiple elements of the ladder. Sometimes there are ones that just operate on just one particular step. But you tend to find that is the main distinction between sales and distribution. So I hope at least that start has given anyone who was unsure as to what sales and distribution is as an understanding of what the two areas in which they operate are. So now, how it is that you end up connecting with them, the strategy, the ability to be able to come up with a plan of how to get in touch with all these people. And if occasionally you see me glancing off to one side, it's because I've got all your questions up on my screen. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So given that the sales companies deal with films that are large and small, and this is something I will stress right from the very beginning. A small budget does not mean a small audience. Equally, a big budget doesn't mean a big one. All of you, I'm sure, will at some point have watched some huge, big blockbuster that was absolutely awful. In that instance, that shows you that just quality of money spent with big stars doesn't automatically mean something is a success. But ultimately, shaping and creating something that is creatively strong is the starting point in this whole chain of activity in terms of what you're getting on. So at what point do you approach a sales company? Part of the problem that all of you and everyone faces is a problem that we've been having for years, which is simply this. You all have, as do I, as did my parents, as did my great-grandparents and everybody else, 24 hours out in a day. Those 24 hours, people are working, they're sleeping, they're eating, as a lot of you are doing now. But so the only time that people can get to consume content, such as their stories, either TV or film, is in their spare time. The trouble is now, particularly since the growth of social media, the number of things competing for people's attention in their spare time is huge. In addition to that, the amount of storytelling and content that's produced is huge. So in many respects, you're not just competing against new stuff that's coming out now. You're competing against things that have already been made. Because one example, which I've spoken about previously, was that one of the biggest hits on Netflix around the world this last year was a TV show called Suits that was made years ago. So the idea that something is new becomes a hit rather than something old is not the case in our world anymore. So how do you try and create something that really is of interest? Sometimes the starting point can simply be by asking and by observing what's around. Taking an eye, literally watching content, finding out what works, what doesn't. I would recommend in this instance, and as much as possible, a lot of my recommendations are going to come to you in a way that don't involve you having to say, how on earth do I get a plane to get a flight to the Cannes Film Festival and pay for a hotel and my stay and who do I meet there? No, there is so much that you can do and inform yourselves literally from where you're sitting right now. The fact that you're on a Zoom call means you've got an internet connection and that's all that you need. So being able to inform yourself of the kind of films, the kind of content that has worked, that has found an audience, that people like, is a starting point, but it's not the only thing. Because until Squid Game exploded during the pandemic on Netflix, it didn't mean that people loved Korean content around the world, but they suddenly discovered it, along with Parasite. So the idea that the stories that you're telling need to fit stuff that has come before is not always the case. And two words that you're going to find me using a lot during the course of this conversation are the words, it depends. Because there is no one way of finding it, no one way of doing it, no one way of succeeding. A lot of this is about a combination of common sense and patience and persistence to take you through all of this. So approaching sales companies. The first thing I would say, and this recommendation, if there is one thing I say to you today that you should make a note of, it's this, which is, for those of you not familiar already, there is a database called Cinando, C-I-N-A-N-D-O, right? C-I-N-A-N-D-O, something you can Google. It was set up before, but is now owned by the Cannes Film Festival. It is the most comprehensive database of almost anyone you could ever want to contact, and often with their names and their email addresses and their phone numbers. The reason this is important is because as we get into sales and distribution later, and the reason I'm mentioning it now is because it is crucial, and I don't want to run out of time and forget this, is that if you ever needed to reach out to a sales agent, if you ever needed to reach out to a distributor, if you ever needed to reach out to in any country around the world, because this database is organized in an incredible way and has a huge volume of companies and individuals, every single one of them will be there, and you can send questions from the comfort of your home. And so the fact that you can ask questions and follow up on some of the stuff that we're talking about today, it's so CINANDO, Sinando.com. This means that you can literally, if I want to speak to a distributor in France, if I want to speak to a sales agent in Mexico, if I want to speak to any number of people, they are all going to be detailed there. So all of a sudden, a lot of what this business is restrictive about, which is knowing who to reach out to, is helped hugely by a database such as this. So what do the sales companies want to know? The first thing to appreciate is that sales companies are a business. So they won't be interested in taking something that they don't think they can sell, or more importantly, isn't going to make them much money. Sales agencies work on commission, which means if they're selling a big film, they're going to get a bigger commission. If they're selling something smaller, they're going to get a smaller commission. So bearing that in mind about that when you're reaching out to people as to how good something is, but also the level of the budget that it's at. Sales companies also get approached by thousands of people all the time. So this is where, again, part of the strategy of what you need to do, it becomes important, which is trying to be as complete as possible in terms of what your film is, what you want it to be, how you're going to reach out before you approach the sales agent. Now, there are different points at which you can connect with them. So it's not a one-time approach where you have everything in a neat package and send it off. No. Sales agents often operate at 3 different levels. And sorry, I'm also going to pause occasionally because trust me, I am speaking a lot. You will hear a lot only because I want to convey a lot of information over the course of this. At some point, if there are questions that are being submitted, Les and Danielle, and you find that it's important enough, please do break in, interrupt me to address that, because what I don't want is to carry on talking and have people not understand the point at which I've started carrying on talking from. So a sales company can often connect with you at 3 points. And I'm being quite general about this. One is you need them to sell the rights to your film in order to get the money to make your film in the first place. So that is often where they talk about a pre-sale. You're asking somebody to sell the rights or license the rights to your film before it's been made. So essentially it's being sold on the promise of what it is. Then you've got a pre-sale, which you're still not finished, but you're already shooting. So you don't need that licensing, that money to physically go ahead and make it. But you still want to give your investors, you want to give people who've backed you, you want to give yourself some sense of, is the market interested in this? So the sales agent may have some footage you may have shot already, you may have been able to cut together a teaser trailer, something. So all of a sudden, rather than just the promise of a package with pictures on a PowerPoint deck, now it's actually there's some visuals to go along. And then there's the third part to it, which is that you're selling it after you've got it done, meaning you've been able to raise the finance, you've been able to get the people together, you've been able to edit it and finish it off. And now you are literally trying to find a sales agent to help take it to market. In the context of this one, I'm going to deal with each of those 3 in turn, because all of these are going to be relevant for you depending on to what extent you end up encountering each of these 3 levels. The pre-sales market is really, really tough, because if you imagine that there are already loads of finished films competing for people's attention, the number of films competing for people to want to get them to invest and buy is even bigger. So a lot of the time, sales agents are going to be incredibly selective about what it is that they look at and whether they take it on board or not. So what I would look in the context of those are film festivals and organizations whereby part of the entry and people that are invited to it are pitching competitions to pitch in front of sales agents, where the winner is a prize as their film gets taken on or gets developed or something. That's the easiest way of shortcutting and making sure that your
project isn't literally one of hundreds of others in an in-tray. If that doesn't exist, then you literally have to take the chance of saying, here is my project, presenting it as comprehensively, as attractively as possible to someone, and saying, I would be interested in having a conversation about this. That is something that, again, will cost you nothing because you can often do it by email and hopefully create a phone call. If you are lucky enough or do have the resources to take yourself to a festival, it's great. But what I would say is this, when you are in markets at the same time as sales agents, remember that they are in that market to sell rather than necessarily to buy. So it can be the best time to contact sales agents is actually outside of the main markets when they aren't so focused on their time and attention. So for example, you've got the European film market coming up over the next couple of weeks. Friends of mine who are sales agents literally have no time for anything else, to look at anything else other than what they're dealing with for that market. So that's on the sales agent side. Approaching them when you have something that's finished is often the much easiest one, because then you can't really hide anymore. Someone can look at it and see, is it good? Is it not? Can I sell it? Can I not? So that is often the easiest way to a sales agent is going to take you seriously, but often the hardest, because it means you've actually been able to raise all the resources to get something made in the first place. So in the Sinando database, excuse me, the Sinando database I was telling you about, you can actually select a category of sales agents by country, by continent to see who they are. And what's interesting is you, by going into that, can actually see what it is they're selling. So you can look and see, has this company sold anything that's similar to the stories that I want to tell in the past? Okay, so very broadly speaking, that deals with the approach of how getting in touch with sales agents is. And remember, package as much of the story as you can, but at the same time, be patient, follow up practically, because the one thing that genuinely will happen is people may just not get back to you. Follow up, always leave each message that you send them saying, look, can you please confirm you've received it? At your convenience, can we find a time to talk about this? Even if that time really isn't, you have to wait weeks and months, you've got to be patient about this as well. So dealing with distributors, a sales agent isn't always the only way. And distributors can sometimes be contacted directly as well. Now, one of the things that can actually work hugely to your advantage, but this again implies, or more often than not, that you've actually got a chance to make what you've wanted to make, are film festivals. Film festivals, of which there are hundreds around the world, which Trinidad has its own long-standing example, are great showcases, because often it's the case that film festivals will look at what's sent to them and they will in turn select the best. So sales agents and distributors will often attend festivals knowing that something that's been selected by the festival has already passed through a screening process. So if you are trying to, and by the way, not all film festivals are up for finished films. There are film festivals that do actually show works in progress. So if you've got something where you've only managed to shoot some of it, you've got ones where, again, like I say, there are segments which do allow pictures of ones. I remember one example was at the Shanghai Film Festival that I've been an advisor to for many years. They have a competitive pitch competition. But what's great about it is it's not just the 10 finalists out of the hundreds who get submitted and whoever wins that pitch. It's the fact that in the room, listening to all these pitches, regardless of whether they're the winner or not in front of the jury, are distributors and financiers and sales agents, listening for the ones that might interest them the most. So again, in all of these cases, think about film festivals, a lot of which, in fact, all of which allow online submissions, and in turn, the details to contact, excuse me, will also be on Sinando, to reach out and ask the film festival, what are your requirements? If you can't see the details on their website already, do they accept projects that are looking for finance, that are looking for sales agents and so on? You may find someone do. So a lot of what I'm suggesting is going to involve you spending a lot of the time online, but you will be able to educate yourself in ways that would alternatively cost you thousands and thousands of dollars flying around the world to meet these people in person. So the distribution side is always possible, because remember, as I said near the beginning, sales companies sell to distributors. That doesn't mean that you can't contact distributors directly. You can essentially try and cut out the middleman. Now, not all distributors, or rather most distributors, will not deal with producers or creatives directly. They will want to go through the filter of a sales agent, the proven track record of a sales agent, but contacting distributors as smaller distributors as possible. So in a lot of these instances, you tend to find, again, using Senando, who are the distributors in certain territories that you'll be able to find are going to actually be the ones that you can approach, that are distributed the kind of films and the kind of stories that you're interested in. So a lot of this activity of trying to reach out and figuring out how to reach out is all intertwined in terms of who these people are. Because often you find sometimes sales companies also distribute, sometimes distribution companies also sell. And often is the case that they will end up working across multiple territories around the world. And they may, in an ideal case, not be interested in the budget, but hopefully be interested in the quality of the story that you look to tell. Because the most extreme example of a film I've worked on was a film called Billy Elliot that was made 20 years ago, which has spawned a musical around the world. But this is a film that was made for about $1 million and made $350 million around the world. Now, that film was, it's, you know, as the note that's just got up, it really is about the quality. But the quality of the story that you can engage with. A much more recent example of that I would give you is the Academy Award-winning film Moonlight, that was made for $1.5 million, that was shot on an incredibly short time frame. So again, the quality of what you're looking to create becomes incredibly important before you start speaking to people, for one simple reason. If you approach them once and they don't like your idea because it's not fully formed or it's not for them, they're very unlikely to give you a chance to come and approach them again and pitch you for the same film. So that's why when you're looking to try and prepare yourself in order to be able to contact these people, try and prepare yourself as much as you can. It doesn't mean you have to do everything, but make sure there's nothing you could have done, nothing you could have checked, whether it's the budget of the film, it's the schedule, it's an idea if you have directors, your cast attached, so on. The more pieces of the jigsaw you can put in place for them, or at least know that you've got, the better they are. So that's touching upon a lot of the sort of the sales and distribution side of this. Bear with me a second, I'm going to call up the questions again. One of the ones that you can contact directly, and again, I know at least one person referred to this earlier, are companies such as Netflix. They are not sales agents, they are not distributors, but they will physically buy and license your film. So in many cases as well, a lot of them individually have people who look for specific areas of the world. So you can find out. I have to say off the top of my head, I don't know if Netflix has their details listed on Senando. I'd have to double check, but I can check that for you. But they're often divided geographically as who you should approach. Netflix do literally acquire and develop content directly. So they will look at you and sometimes just make you an offer for the price of the content that you're creating. There is one small downside, and it's one that may not be practical, but it's worth bearing in mind. If you sell something to Netflix and it becomes the biggest thing in the history of Netflix, you don't see another penny. You literally don't see a dime. Okay? This has often been one of the big issues that people have sometimes had from established makers of wanting to go to Netflix in the first place. Now, you give them something great, they'll likely want to fund everything you want to make again. But that's the point. And sometimes people choose, do I go more a traditional route? Do I want to try and get it distributed to a sales agent, country by country, to cinemas, to viewed on TV? Or do I go straight to Netflix, which allows me the comfort of one deal, means my film has been bought for the world. I can say it's a Netflix movie, but guess what? If it's big, the money they gave me for that, that's the only thing I'm ever going to see. So that's one of the things that's worth bearing in mind, often when you're dealing with the streamers rather than with traditional sales and distribution. Now, the idea of creating something that's a success is a lovely high-class problem. You know, if you've got other people, plenty of people, all of whom want your content, that's a high-class problem. So the reason I mention that is if you have the choice between going down one route or the other, it's worth bearing in mind. In the context of this, it's always worth looking, and I will always encourage people to do this. Please, 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 if anyone is ever going to offer you an agreement to sell your film, to distribute your film, get them to put stuff in writing. And if they offer you a contract, please, please, please read it. Or if you don't understand it, make sure someone who does understand the terminology explains it to you, or if you don't understand it, ask the very people who sent it to you as well. Because what you don't want is often having obligations on you as the creator to do more that you didn't expect you're going to have to undertake in terms of the material to provide, in terms of the material to provide, in terms of additional costs you may have to bear. In all of this, make sure you read through anything that you get sent very, very carefully. And if people are going to make commitments to you, make sure they make those commitments in writing. Sorry, forgive me, someone's trying to get through to me. So in terms of the approach, I want to make sure, are there, in the context of what sales and distribution is, and the first sort of steps and the things you need to think about before you approach them, or how it is you identify them, are there any other questions that need to be asked? Again, forgive me because I'm doing them on my phone. Some of the questions can pop up and I'm not going to get to see them very, very clearly. They'll pop up just for a second. I saw that are sales agents predatory? They are, but really only for the big stuff. If there's a big film with a package of Hollywood stars that's been put together, everybody wants it, so they're all going to want to jump in. The reality is that in a lot of instances, sales agents will have relationships. There are people that they've worked with before that they'll work with again, and will actually, they'll become the first people to go to. I think these things sometimes with the film business that ends up making it harder for people to break into are that the relationships, if I create a relationship with you and it works, I'm not going to bother asking anybody else. That relationship will continue until either you or I mess up or something doesn't work, and then I'll go somewhere else. So sometimes that's why some relationships are a bit embedded. So that was on the predatory side. Are there any other questions? Sorry, Danielle or Camille, I don't know if you can flash them up again, if there are any others.
Yeah,
Good. Let me just have
you have 2 questions in the chat.
Fantastic. Let me just pop into them now. No. Excuse me. Does Netflix allow changes to its licensing contract? Absolutely not. The idea, that is the case of if you're going to get screwed by a bad contract, it's better to know that it's coming rather than somehow think that it's better than it actually is. The reality is that most companies are going to be in a position to say, look, this is a contract, take it or leave it. But it's up to you to know what it is that you're signing up to do, or what you're signing up for, rather. Once the run is completed, can it be resold elsewhere? The answer is yes. And this comes back to the fact that it is said that it's licensing periods. One of the most successful new platforms that has existed recently is a company called Mubi, M-U-B-I. Mubi started with a rather inventive idea of taking streaming rights, not for years, but just for a few months. Nobody was doing that. And the idea that the film being committed somewhere for a few months was never a big deal. So they actually managed to secure a lot of rights because the time period wasn't particularly long. So once you've licensed your film, make sure that that obviously that period is followed quite carefully and closely. And remember, licensing of all sorts. This is not some big licensing deal to Netflix. This can be a licensing deal to a local television station. It can be a licensing to Trinidad or to another Caribbean island or to somewhere else. The reality is, make sure that you understand that the moment you're licensing it to someone, it means someone else can't use it or shouldn't be using it. The other thing I will add as well, and this takes us into a financing conversation that's probably best left for another time or another lunch and learn, which is just because you license it to a sales company, who in turn sells it to a distributor. Unlike Netflix, if that film becomes a hit, if that film succeeds financially, you end up sharing in that upside. And that will be a contractual commitment that you end up sharing with. So that's why, again, the terms under which you end up licensing or contracting a film to the people who are going to be handling it on your behalf really, really matters. Because as I say, if it really connects with an audience in an incredible way. So the example of Billy Elliot again, which although it was a Universal film, it was a very tiny budget one. It was a first-time film by a first-time filmmaker, written by a sitcom TV writer. It was made for such a low budget that it was licensed and sold around the world at a very low price. But because it became such a gargantuan box office hit, there was a lot of that profit that was coming back that then needed to be shared out. So that's why there are extreme examples, but sometimes the ability for something, for you still to be owed money, rather than just that licensing fee you got paid up front, is always still a possibility, particularly when you're dealing with very small, low licensing costs to begin with. I'm going to go back into the chat and just check one of the others. So, pretty true. Recommending having a lawyer for negotiations. I'd say both yes and no. And I'll explain what I mean by that. In any kind of deal, whether you're buying a house, whether you're doing any kind of business, a lawyer who understands the nature of the business and the terminology is always incredibly useful. So there are times genuinely that you yourself can familiarize yourself with the terms that things work under and do a lot, if not all of it, for yourself. There are times where, again, if you understand nothing, excuse me, a lawyer is going to be a very necessary part of that. What I would recommend in that case is, again, you can look around, forgive me, again, this is a specific area. I don't know that Sinando goes down to the detail of film lawyers. It does sales, it does distribution, it does festivals, it does funding. I don't know if it does legal. But a lawyer will be helpful. What I would always recommend is to try and do as much of the work as you can before the lawyer is involved, so it ends up being far cheaper to you. Equally, what I would also do is remember, if you've got a negotiation, let your lawyer be the bad guy. Let him be the one who goes, that's ridiculous, that's, you know, what a horrible offer, there's no way we're doing that. By putting a lawyer between you in the negotiations, because the chances are the person he's going to be negotiating with is another lawyer, not the principal. It actually allows these conversations which they are familiar with for them to be able to have. So a lawyer can help, but I would only recommend it if you genuinely don't understand what you're doing. And by the way, they're not just useful for a first film deal. Lawyers are useful at every single stage, because often they will understand the limits when someone is offering something that is unfair, when they're offering something that is fair. If they're experienced, they can tell you if there's an offer on the table, they can look at it and say, you know what, this is pretty good, or no, I can get you something better. Right, a question about typical arrangements with a sales agent. I realize this is something, again, I haven't dealt with some of the financial aspects of this, which in a sales agent is much, much simpler. Like if you've got someone to sell your car or to sell something else, to sell a home for you, sales agents operate on a fee. So what you will agree with them in any agreement, any contract, is they will take a percentage of whatever they end up licensing the film for. Now, that percentage can vary, because that also will vary depending on who has had to put together all the marketing materials for your film. So if a sales agent has had to go through the time and effort and cost putting stuff together, those costs are going to be passed on to you whenever they sell it. So coming back to the point I made earlier about trying to be as prepared as much as possible, the more that you can give to a sales agent, so it's such a no-brainer that all it needs is for them to like it, to say we can take this on, the easier it's going to be for you to be able to do that. So they're invariably, the percentage will really vary depending what territory they're selling it for and what budget. But it's very much on a percentage basis, and that percentage is open for some negotiation. Now, who gets paid and when? This is an interesting one as well. And I'm glad it's been raised in the context of this chat, because the reason why sales are actually relevant for, or rather pre-sales are relevant for a film being financed, isn't because you get the money up front. What happens is that they will contract with a distributor. So I am the sales agent, you come to me, I agree to sell your film, I go to the Cannes film market, and I meet with a distributor who wants to take the rights for Italy for your film. Now, they will pay a signature fee, typically around 10% of the value of the contract, right? But they are only ever going to pay the balance of that when you have physically made the film, given it to them. So it's literally like you've delivered the film to them, they pay the rest of the money. So how that helps in financing is depending on who you've sold it to, and assuming they're reputable companies that have been in the business, that value of that contract can actually be taken to a bank, to a private investor, to some other organization who will see that the only difference between this having any value now versus the future is a question of timing. So what they will allow you to do is they will say, if you've got a contract here worth 100,000, I'm going to give you 85, 90,000 now, but when that contract comes in, part of my fee is I keep the whole thing. So often it's the case that whilst pre-sales can help you get the money in, they don't give you the value of everything because that value has yet to be realized. So that's why in terms of who gets paid, it's the distributor who pays the sales agent, and the sales agent in turn would pay you. So that's why when films need those contracts in order to get made, there are a number of other complicated steps, sometimes which often fall apart, by the way, in order to make sure and see whether that gets committed. One of the ways they often fall apart is if you're trying to sell a film on the promise of something. The most often the promise that people use, and I'm using this as a very generic example, is that you've got a recognizable actor or actress or director involved in the film. So now they're committing on the basis of that. If it takes too long and now all of a sudden that person has to go off and do something else, or they change their mind, or they're not contractually committed, all of a sudden that commitment that you had can fall apart. So in putting together a film, you are putting together a jigsaw puzzle, but also over time, some of those pieces may disappear or change. So it's not like the moment a piece is in place, it stays in place forever. Sometimes it can, if there's a very good relationship, but ultimately that sense of which, if what I am selling changes, then the person I was selling it to has a right to turn around and say, it's not the same thing, I don't have to take it anymore. So that's a rather long-winded way of dealing with the person, with Jason Lindsley's question about the commercial arrangement with the sales agent, who gets paid and when. Is there a guide to determining fair prices? Nope, not at all. Literally, it's the price that someone is willing to pay. It really is as simple as that. You know, you can. The thing to do, to bear in mind, is there is no, and this is why getting the budget right is important. There's no reason for you to want to sell it for a huge amount more than it costs you to make it, unless it's something that already has incredible proven value. It's won at a festival. It's something that people will be talking about. So now all of a sudden there are many people who want it, so up goes the price. The reality is that there's no way of determining the price. Sometimes you can use a guide, but the reality of different years, different projects, different circumstances, it's very hard to sort of compare like with like. So there's no such thing as a fair price. It's ultimately what you can negotiate. Now, strategies to know. Sorry, the question just disappeared off a second. Strategies filmmakers can employ to market or promote their films during distribution. If your film is lucky enough that it's been distributed, meaning someone's bought it, part of the commitment you may have signed up to is actually to promote it. So it's not whether you want to, it's you may actually have to. Now that commitment to promote will often involve, you know, the filmmakers themselves in looking to do it. And sometimes, by the way, this can happen years after a film is made, as to when suddenly something eventually emerges and gets finished and gets sold. So it's not so much to the strategy promotion during the distribution phase, because remember the marketing at the distribution phase is on the distributor. They are the ones who are taking it to cinemas. They're the ones who are selling it to TV stations and others because they've got the rights in their own territory. But the cost of marketing falls on them. It falls entirely on them. So they have to decide, if I've bought something, having seen it, I know what it is. But if I bought something in advance and then I get it and I realize it's not that great, I'm contractually obliged to pay for it, but I'm not going to spend additional marketing money putting out something that I think isn't going to be worth it. So they're really not going to want to. If it is something good, they're going to want to do the exact opposite. So that's why the marketing and promotion in the distribution phase is very much in the hands of the distributor, but it's something that they will often want the filmmakers to be involved in. Again, another question about a good licensing deal and rates, it's you won't know. I mean, ultimately, the right deal is a middle ground between, if it's something you're willing to accept, then I would say it's a decent deal. Sometimes you may have to accept something because there's literally nothing else on the table, and you have to decide, do I take this or do I not? And if I don't, what are the consequences of that? The kind of pitches that sales agents are attracted to, let me deal with, there's several questions in this question. Let me deal with each in turn. I think all of you, by reading the trades, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, a number of these are Screen Daily you have to subscribe to, but Variety, Deadline you don't have to. And they cover everything from all over the world. If you keep on top of this, particularly during the market time, and particularly during markets, they produce what are called dailies. So rather than websites being updated with a news story every few hours, they literally, every single day is a bunch of news stories that have all come out that day on stuff happening in the market that day. It will give you an idea what's been sold. Are people buying comedies, horrors? Are they interested in Spanish language? Are they interested in all sorts of things? So deadline.com, Deadline, is one I would recommend, and Variety. Also, I know that you put up a link for Screen Daily, but Screen Daily you have to pay to subscribe. You can actually register and get a few articles for free, but the reality is that Deadline and Variety are probably the two most obvious ones. So keep an eye on the market. It's almost like the equivalent of saying, if I want to buy a house for myself, but I want to buy it in an area that if I need to move somewhere else years from now, I know I can sell it. So what are the good areas? What are the bad areas? What's a good car? What's a bad car? The same kind of thought behind wanting to buy and sell a product can often be the same between the buying and selling of a film. What is it that people are buying now? Pitch decks, again, it's about telling the story in an attractive, interesting way. So a pitch deck is obviously something you can sell, which if the person you're pitching it to is the other side of the world, it's going to be a hell of a lot more cost effective and time effective than if you're physically pitching. Nowadays, what's always possible is that what you can do is send them some of the material in a pitch deck by email and then do a pitch by Zoom. So the ability to connect, and Zoom and video conferencing has just changed the world in so many ways, but it allows you to be in the room, so to speak, and really sort of pitch. But the idea that a pitch is going to be, they are likely to want to see something in writing that they can read first. And if they are interested in it enough, then they'll follow, the next follow-up would likely be a Zoom. Should we tweak our language to be more digestible for bigger markets? I think it's not about tweaking your language. It's about just making sure that something is understood. And if that means literally being mindful of how you describe something, the words that you use, then yes. The reality is that the ability to communicate, not just about language, but making sure that someone understands what it is that you're conveying it. Because remember, sometimes it could be very easy to pitch something verbally, but trying to capture the essence of it in writing can be a lot harder. What images do you use? How much writing? How little writing? Do you have a nice snappy log line that works, or does it not? You know, the fact that when you're dealing with something that's creative, it can be incredibly hard. Sometimes writers, creators are the worst pitchers of their own work. They're fantastic writing and delivering a script, but they're terrible in trying to summarize it in a pitch. So I suppose in that sense, recognize your strength. And the one thing I don't know, again, amongst all of you on here, is how many of you are working as a team? How many of you are literally working just by yourself? Are you a writer at home, writing with no notes being given because there's no producer attached? And you've got to be your own filter as to what's right or wrong? Or to what extent are all of you, some of you already working in smaller teams, helping to create the stuff that you're already looking to make? Let me see, have I missed any other questions on that? I'm just going to go back to make sure there's anything else that if there's anything that I've missed. Because I think what I can do separately on another occasion is essentially take you through a Film Economics 101, which essentially shows what it is it's a numerical breakdown of a contract. It shows you what are the areas that people make money, lose money, which are the terms you can negotiate, which are the ones that you can't. And remember that whilst elements of this may seem either foreign or far away from you, none of what I've described today is really any different from a really large film with stars' names that you recognize to a very small film that you may choose to make with two people in a room. The reality is that fight to get it seen, that fight to get it understood, that fight to get people to support it, you may need to be more patient, more understanding, but also more informed. Hence, coming back to Sanando, again, as a way of saying, well, I don't know a single sales agent. Here they all are. It won't depend on me. It won't depend on Leslie. It won't depend on anybody else other than you being able to reach out to them. Now, how you reach out, what you inform them, when you ask, those are the kind of things that we can help with. But remember, at the core of this storytelling, everybody here is interested in stories that are going to touch an audience. The film business is a film business, but it wouldn't exist without the stories that people are looking to create.
All right. Oh, one question from Eric Barry. Oh, now you're
Two.
asking a lot of questions. Go for it.
Yeah. Now, is your region too small to attract? The answer is very simply is yes. And by the way, there are lots of even much larger countries that are really small. Because when you say a distribution operation, you're trying to make something that's going to cost X and hopefully reach an audience who are going to pay for it in different ways that makes it bigger than the amount it cost you to make it. So that's ultimately the commercial play of what you're trying to do. If you're making something for a really small budget, the ability that a big Trini audience and the TV stations or whatever other commercial opportunities for someone to license it, buy it just within your territory, it may still be possible. The trouble is that what you are minimizing is the chance for any real upside. So of course, you're going to be inherently limited by the distribution opportunities in your territory. But what I would always remind you is this, that just because you live where you live doesn't mean that the only people who are interested in those stories where you live are the people where you live. Those stories can connect anywhere else. And the ability to reach out internationally, even if however localized your story may be, if you're telling it in a way that ultimately people can connect with it, then that story will travel. Does the sale principle explain to apply to live broadcast sports? I don't know, is the answer. I think when it comes to the sale of and licensing of long-form content, of TV content, that is different in a number of ways. That would be worth a separate conversation. Again, because I don't want people getting confused with this if they're going down a TV route, which, by the way, is one of the things that really is happening a lot nowadays, again, because of the growth of streamers. You may find the story you want to tell doesn't fit 2 hours, 3 hours. You're having to cut stuff out that you really feel is essential to the story. And so telling it over 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours is the way to go. So if that's the case, then you've answered the question, do I need to make a film or do I need to make this as a TV series? But yeah, in the context of feature films, that's really what the conversation has been today. Live broadcast, I'm not aware of the dynamics of that to the degree that I can talk about it knowledgeably. And TV as well, like TV series long form, has its own differences to film that is worth focusing on separately.
All right, so it's 12:57, and of course, wait, did you answer Eric Barry's question? He's asking,
Which
is
one?
the
Oh, forgive me, I missed Eric. Sorry, Eric's was one above the last one. I worry about the approach. No, can I just say, Eric, you've got to, like everybody else, you've got to be prepared to be ignored, not because they think worse, but just simply because they've got so much else to focus on. The reality is that the more information you can give them, whether it's a complete script, a pitch deck, things attached, elements attached, finance attached, any element that you think is going to complete it. What I would say you shouldn't do is literally just go to them with an idea or just a script. Because ultimately, something that is so early on in the process, sales agents, given the nature of their function, are going to want something much more fully formed. Because remember, if there's one rule of thumb, I would say, what's the most you can give them that requires the least effort from their behalf to be able to take the next step forward with you? If you've still got a lot of the pieces in the jigsaw to put together, such as actors, such as a director, then the chances are either they're going to ignore it or they're going to say no. But just bear in mind that if you have trouble hearing back from or connecting, it's not about being ignored. It's just there's a lot of people asking exactly the same as you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julian. And before we wrap up our lunch and learn, I do want to thank Fellow Key for facilitating this session with Julian. And I also want to acknowledge Hawani Keskesa, who is a multi-hyphenate producer from Atlanta, who, of course, we do have some other sessions coming up, producers. I like that you mentioned the film economics, Julian. That is something we really would like to do a deep dive with. And so today we want to thank you all very much. And to Julian, thank you. Please look out for our questionnaire. We would like to get feedback regarding the sessions. We have a lot of additional lunch and learns, whether it be online or in person, coming up. So stay tuned. Have a safe carnival and enjoy. On behalf of
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Lovely to speak to you.
Bye.